When America made half the steel in the world, half the steel in America was made here. Now the smokestack industries aren't even scrapyards because nobody wants the scrap. They're just piles of junk. Heaps of jaw-breaking toffee for giants, the abstract, formless forms of former glory. You would expect a city that had lost so much to be ready for the scrap heap itself, but this is Chicago. The world's most famous unknown city looks even taller than it should because the surroundings are so flat. The lake is flat and goes right on out of sight like an inland sea. The land is flat, north into Canada, south into the deep Middle West, and west all the way to the Rockies. Launched from this infinity of flatness, the buildings look taller than anywhere else in the world, and some of them are the tallest in the world anyway. Chicago was where skyscrapers were invented, and they still look better here than anywhere else. With nothing to hem them in, they don't look as if they went up because they couldn't spread out. They look as if they went up because they felt like it. Hardly anybody who doesn't live in Chicago knows what it's got. Certainly I didn't. I knew about the elevated railway and the famous downtown loop it runs around, but I didn't know that the stuttering contraption rattled through a business district so new, so clear, so classy, so glassy. The old Chicago burned down in 1870. It wasn't very old to start with, and there wasn't much of it then. So really the whole place, history included, has been around for not much more than a century. The visitor can be forgiven for assuming that the few things he has heard about were all that ever happened. Trains in the sky, stockyards and steel mills, Italian gangsters and Irish politicians, the first sustained nuclear chain reaction, and the last gasp of youthful innocence when Mayor Daley's police hit flower power on the head at the Democratic Convention in 1968. When Al Capone was running Chicago, he had people killed. When Mayor Daley was running Chicago, he didn't need to. Corruption was king, or so the story went. So how did that sleazy Chicago turn into this sleek one, with stunning new buildings going up between stunning new buildings, as if the city were racing itself skywards? Chicago has the tallest building in the world, but like Everest, it doesn't stand out, because the buildings around it are tall too. Chicago is the architect's adventure playground. The skyscrapers have become cloud punchers. They draw down the stratosphere like syringes. Some of them look ready to take off, like crystal spaceships with a cargo of conditioned air. Even the one new building that just sits there looks like a lost Martian flying saucer that has run out of fuel. It's the Illinois Center, which, although it doesn't look like a skyscraper, actually is a skyscraper, taken to a new evolutionary stage. A lattice bubble in which the visitor wanders bewildered, vainly looking for the building. The original idea of the skyscraper was that the steel frame would take the load and leave the curtain walls free to do nothing except keep out the weather. In the Illinois Center, the steel frame has become the curtain walls, and there is almost nothing inside except space. In its first summer, the building's workforce was microwaved when the air conditioning didn't work. But there was only one suicide from the top of the atrium. Though he hit the bullseye with tactful accuracy, he failed to set a trend, because despair just doesn't fit the mood of downtown Chicago. The tall buildings might look like science fiction, but the people aren't robots. At ground level, the city is on the human scale. Spick and span like Disneyland, it makes you think twice about the standard idea of private affluence and public squalor. It's got streets you could eat your dinner off.
Try the grapes? Sure. What do you think? No seeds.
Being righteous. Everybody ought to want to be righteous.
There was a man announcing the end of civilization, but I couldn't believe he'd picked the right spot for it to happen.
I want to have Jesus in my life. I want to have Jesus in my life.
If this was urban anguish, it looked like subsidized theater. If these were the poor, they looked prosperous. Where does the money come from? It comes from money. Chicago used to get rich from making things. Now it gets richer by making deals. The Board of Trade is where the real action is now. The big money isn't in livestock, it's in stocks and shares, or the grain and gold that will never come to Chicago, but will change hands far away on the basis of agreements reached here. As a trading floor, Chicago is up there with London and Tokyo. The world stock market crisis of October 1987 must have looked like a riot here, because this was just a quiet working day. How the working day works, however, is impossible to figure out without a guide. Tom Schuff made things less obscure.
I'll be there in a minute. Okay. So what happens? The order comes in and then you trade in here, right?
This is a price-seeking function.
Price-seeking function.
A price-seeking function. An order may come in to buy 100,000 or a million. An order could come in to sell 100,000 or a million bushels. And the price is established by open outcry.
Open outcry.
Open outcry.
It sounds like it.
We have many people bidding, many people offering. You'll notice that we use our hands.
Yeah.
If I want to sell something, I turn my palms out.
Yeah.
Selling. If I want to buy something, I turn my palms in.
Right. Selling, buying.
The deal having been struck by open outcry, I was not surprised to see it written down. I was surprised to see it thrown away.
The order is generally dropped on the steps of the pit, believe it or not, and our runners will go around and they'll look. As you can see over here, there are orders laying there that have been executed. I'll show you one. This is an order here. It's a spread order, buying 10 November beans, selling 10 January beans. This is the price. This is who the other side of the trade was made with. Again, that's the price, and that's the executing broker. Now, this order will be left there, and a runner from this clearinghouse, which happens to be Refco, will come around, pick up the order, take it back to the phone, call the customer, give him the endorsement, and then this is punched up on a computer.
What happens if it gets cleared away with the rubbish?
That's called an error.
What's the most you've ever lost in a day?
Close to several $1 million.
Really?
Yes.
It's a privilege to be standing next to you.
In fact, I later learned, a lot of the people I was looking at were multimillionaires. They didn't really need to be down here. They could have sent someone else. But they were enjoying themselves. And that's what makes Chicago hard to beat, in this field as in many others. In Chicago, it's not a new thing for a service industry to turn into an art form. In 1879, the first Marshall Field built a beautiful department store, and it built him one of the biggest of the old family fortunes that used to run Chicago, and still helped to enrich its artistic life. The old families endowed all the museums and the galleries, and if the tax advantages never hurt, there was a real urge to beautify the city, which is probably why the present store looks like a corridor in the Vatican. There were 4 Marshall Fields before the current one. Marshall Field V was educated expensively in the East, and for a while he stayed there, but Chicago brought him back. And now he's happy to call Chicago home, although that doesn't mean he's uncritically happy about Chicago. What happened to Chicago's first families? Do they still run things in this town?
No, no more. There are a few, but most of the first families of the old days have dissipated and gone away. And I say that it's really new families that have come in and leaders of major corporations who are the big names now.
But in the old days, it was an oligarchy.
Yeah, you could call up half a dozen people in town and do whatever you wanted in the old days, and that's not true, obviously, anymore.
Who runs Chicago now?
I think one of the great tragedies of Chicago today is that nobody's running it. There isn't even a group of groups, if you will, who've gotten together. Everybody's so busy fighting between themselves that, in my judgment, Chicago simply isn't being run. I think in this country, we really have to be hit in the face with a board before we do anything. And I think Chicago has to lose more jobs and get in worse shape before the black community and the white community and the powers that are and aren't are really going to be willing to talk and each give up something to work together. I don't think we're there yet.
Let's talk about race as an issue. Is it alive now? It
Yes,
hasn't been before?
I consider it maybe the #1 issue still in Chicago. And Chicago's always been a city of ethnic groups. But where there used to be 15 ethnic groups that all had a little say, now there are really 3 major groups. The whites, the blacks, and the Latino groups. And so that they're all a lot louder, and the agendas may be quite different. And I think until we get through a period of all of us trying to carry out just our agenda, we got to keep, race will continue to be an issue. I don't think, to me it isn't race, it's economics, but it's easier to yell race, so that's what we're all doing.
When you say things have to get worse before they get better, what do you envisage? Riots?
No, I think that the economy will get worse in this city, and that the few jobs for less skilled people that are left will begin to shrink even more, and that will hurt the whole city, because then the few companies that are left will have to pick up more and more of the tab. And I think when it really gets to be a strain, people sit down and say, oh my God, what can we do about this? We're not quite there yet. It's not tough enough yet.
So what's going to be the stockyard of the future for Chicago?
I don't have an answer. I mean, the one thing we have is a large labor pool, a lot of whom are unskilled. And I really think the critical question for this country in metropolitan areas is, what are we going to do with a large pool of unskilled people? I don't think it's that difficult if you think about it. My favorite example is if the city simply mandated that any building over 5 floors had to have an operator in the elevator, you could create 50,000 jobs overnight. And so it isn't impossible if we want to do it. And it isn't that expensive to do. Putting somebody on welfare is pretty expensive, because you've got to pay that person and the person who keeps tab of how you pay them. And I have real problems with an endless growth in welfare rolls, not only for that, but for the humanistic side of what it does to people's pride and destroying families and blah, blah, blah. At the very least, it guarantees we'll have a major drug industry in this country for the next 25 years, no matter what we do.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from West Memphis, Arkansas, Mr. Junior West. So what? Wait a minute, listen. I started to tell you last night, baby, in my car.
Jazz came up the river from New Orleans with the shining trumpets of King Oliver and Louis Armstrong. They didn't stay in Chicago. The blues did, as the music of urban deprivation. But it's easy to forget that when you hear them pumping the stuff out in the clubs. The music works like strong drink, and so does the strong drink. But next day's hangover soon melts in the brilliant open air. The fountain is Chicago's pride, although they keep quiet about the fact that it's controlled by a computer in Atlanta, Georgia. The whole city is on the water wagon. As well as the lake, there's the Chicago River, flowing right through the middle of town. The river makes a handy thoroughfare for the well-heeled, who can park their runabouts in front of midtown apartment blocks with names like Marina City. The river used to flow into the lake, bringing pollution. So the city fathers rejigged it to flow in the other direction, sending the pollution to somebody else. They were men of decision. The wives of the men of decision hang out at crickets, where they have a regular lunch club. Weighed down by the responsibilities of either possessing or being married to many millions of dollars, they gather to dig the dirt in a time-honored manner, which is by now dishonored in almost any other city in the Western world. But feminism isn't very much in favor here yet. While the men make the money, the women get together and decide how it should be either spent or given away. The hairstyles, the couture clothes, and the solid gold personal adornments were therefore merely a surface distraction. I was being let in on a planning conference.
Then we get to find out, if we don't see each other all the time, what one's doing, what charity event somebody else is doing, we can get involved in. We can criticize each other.
Charity events, we discuss sex and
we
life.
discuss sex and other
That's
people.
right.
We don't discuss charity.
We discuss
And Nancy
who's ripping off
Klimley.
the other charities.
The ladies go down to the river to wash the sheets on the rocks 300 years ago, and they talk to one another about sex.
We already
Yes,
decided
women
that it would break
traditionally
my
get
nails.
together. Now we're talking about rocks.
That's what you're really doing here, is you're beating the laundry against the rock here.
Well, we're not doing it. It's being done somewhere else. It's the concept
never
that
done a
women have
load of
traditionally, whether
laundry.
they loved each other, liked each other, knew each other, and if they're living in the same community, women traditionally get
Did
together.
laundry?
No, get together.
Is it a man's town?
Yes.
Absolutely.
It is a city of power, and I think it's a powerful city that works because men make it work. You ask if it's a man's city? Indeed it is a man's city.
But you don't mind?
I love it.
Yeah.
Look where we're dining. We're around leather banquettes. This looks like a man's club, doesn't it? Doesn't it look like an English men's club?
It didn't look like any English men's club that I'd ever been in, but it certainly smelled nicer. I was breathing oxygen, nitrogen, and Chanel No. 5.
Tell me about husbands. How many of you had altogether?
Altogether.
Can I guess? 1, 2, 3,
Does
4,
anybody have
5,
one of those little computers?
No, it's not a chat. Oh, well, Bonnie's here. That'll certainly up it.
16.
Sugar,
And Americans have marriages instead of love affairs. How many of you had?
3,
Right.
6,
That's not so bad.
11, 12.
12.
Collectively.
That's not a lot.
No.
8 women, 12 husbands? That's below the national average, as you know.
I think so.
Actually, the girls were juggling the statistics. They left out the poor husbands and only counted the rich ones. It was a price-seeking function. I enjoyed the champagne, but couldn't dispel the suspicion that the well-groomed ladies pouring it down my throat were not a fully representative sample of the population of Chicago. A more typical cross-section can be found on a weekday afternoon at Wrigley Field, home of the Cubs, one of Chicago's 2 Major League Baseball teams. Wrigley Field is a small, friendly park that a lucky hitter can sock the ball clean out of when the wind is in the right direction. When it is, and the sun is out, and the Cubs are doing well in the league or even badly, a large sample of the Chicago workforce makes lying phone calls to the office and the factory and turns up here, hoping that the boss won't be goofing off too. He probably will be, but he'll be in the stand and not the bleachers, where the wittily howling plebeians join in open outcry to make life miserable for the opposing outfielders.
Here we go! Here we go!
The people of Chicago are so keen on sport that they don't see why their team should ever lose. Their football team, the Bears, usually doesn't, mainly because it is full of specially designed men with nicknames like the Refrigerator or the Armored Personnel Carrier.
How many did you get home then?
The Cubs, however, disturbingly persist in being only human. Their performance is variable. They trail the other team until the 9th inning and then stage a dramatic recovery. Or they don't, which is even more dramatic. Whole families of fans spend the entire game anxiously biting pieces out of the printed program.
What happened then? Why wasn't the guy out?
Third baseman caught it with his bare hand and he looked at the second base for a force out, but he got there in time. We want a hit!
The Cubs staged a dramatic recovery when a pop fly to a loaded base walked a triple play line drive spitball bunt into the dugout. Chicago had come through. Everyone went home happy. They went home happy and they went home slowly, pausing to enjoy a pickup band of improbably high standard for a few guys meeting on a street corner to jam for pennies. Where was all this music coming from? Seemingly from out of the ground. It was a constant reminder that the straight up and down city was built on a bubbling and heaving racial and ethnic lava field. The blacks could be said to have arrived. Asian boat people are still arriving. Their children are star students. A village burns down somewhere in Southeast Asia, and a generation later, a Nobel Prize winner grows up here. And always arriving, in numbers beyond counting, are the Hispanics. At the moment, they're the third biggest population group in Chicago behind the whites and blacks. In the opinion of many besides themselves, they're getting the heaviest deal of the lot. But life would have to be much worse than it is before it was anything like as bad as it was where they came from. Working their way north until they get to where they can go no further, they come to Chicago.
Where did you come from originally?
I come from the state of Guanajuato in Mexico. I was born in a town that's called Salvatierra. And I came to the United States in 1926. I've been here in Chicago ever since 1929, because I first went to Omaha, Nebraska.
Tell me about this area. Is it all Spanish speaking in this area?
18th Street, but 4 or 5 blocks, one way or the other, they're all Spanish.
Mm-hmm. And they're all Spanish speakers, but where are they from mainly? Mexico?
The majority. Mm-hmm. I'll say about 90% of the Spanish speaking in the neighborhood, they're all Mexican.
Poor people or any rich people?
No. Very few rich people come this way. No. It's mostly labor people, you know, people that come here to work to try and make $1 or $2 and all that.
It wasn't the most prosperous-looking barber shop I'd ever seen, but that might have been because young Hispanic men nowadays spend much less time at the hairdresser than in the garage, where they build their own cars or re-rig old cars to do new tricks.
Hey, that is really something, that car.
A car like this is called a low rider and is basically designed to stun the opposite sex into helpless submission.
It's a work of art. What's it for, to get the girls?
No, it's just to show what you got here in Chicago. That's about it.
How do you control the thing to make it go up and down? Where are the buttons?
The buttons, this is the button
Show me.
right here. We'll just push it up, it'll go up. Push it down, it'll go down. Now to open the doors, I have the locks over there by where the radio usually goes, but I don't have no radio. I have it on the floor.
Can you show me what it'll do?
Well, sure, I can show you what I do.
Yeah, hop in.
All that engineering skill is going to waste at the moment, but the armed services are bound to want it sooner or later, if only to turn old cruise missiles into canoes. After that, he'll be upwardly mobile, part of one more ethnic epic using Chicago as a location. The Irish were the first to do it because they arrived able to speak English, and they made Chicago their town. In Mayor Daley's day, practically every name on the city's payroll started with O. The impertinent reporter who pointed out this coincidence is now the star columnist of the Chicago Tribune. His name is Mike Royko.
I know a police captain who came to this country as a young man, got off the boat in New York, took a train to Chicago, was met by relatives in Chicago. They didn't take him home. They took him directly to a police station where he was sworn in, given a uniform, and sent out to direct traffic at an intersection. I mean, his first day in the city. So it was simply a matter of the language advantage.
He had virtues, didn't he, Daly?
Oh, yeah. He believed husbands should be faithful to their wives, and you should go home at night and have dinner with your family, and pay your bills on time, and don't swear in public. Open the doors for ladies, and don't lose elections.
So what were the drawbacks?
Well, he inherited a corrupt system. He didn't change anything unless public disclosure forced him to. For example, he did reform the police department. He took credit for reforming the police department. Well, that's because while he was mayor, it was discovered that a group of his policemen were also operating as burglars. They would ride around in their police cars and burglarize. They had a professional burglar as their accomplice, and they would break into businesses and steal things, and that was just an example of what was going on. And we had police commanders traveling with mafia big shots, and the department was totally corrupt.
Does it feel a fundamentally different city to you now than it was when you were young?
Oh, yeah. There's been tremendous changes in the city. When I was a young man working downtown, for example, you'd never see a black face downtown. Blacks knew the downtown area was off limits to them. And is for all its reputation of being a racially polarized city, over the last 20 years, there have been enormous changes in Chicago. The blacks, we still have essentially two black ghettos, the south side and the west side, but blacks are now living in parts of the city that have been unheard of 20, 25 years ago.
Find the black middle class living anywhere, but to get to the ghettos, you have to follow the music. At the Maxwell Street Market, the music still sounds sweet. Maxwell Street is the kind of market that sells things you don't really want. Miami Vice photo albums, old batteries, things that used to be household appliances, warped shoes, non-operative ashtrays. It would have taken me all day to spend $10, but I was ready to hang around and buy dud merchandise indefinitely, as long as I could listen to those lyrical guitars. Can a way of life that produces a sound like that be all bad? Well, yes, it can. The toughest Chicago ghettos are Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor homes. Low-cost high-rise housing the city put up and then forgot. They have an average of one husband at home for every 100 people, partly because the rent bill is too high if a family stays together. The city's black administration says it needs federal funds to fix things. The people who exist in these vertical detention centers say that the buildings are being run down so that the land can be sold off. They say that when they talk at all. Trapped by broken elevators, many of them make life bearable by the most portable available means. Drugs are currency, and the gang warfare might as well be real warfare for the cops up against it. An ex-Marine who thought he saw bad things in Korea The man in charge is Captain Woods.
The history of Chicago will reveal that we've had Irish gangs and English gangs and Polish gangs and gangs, as we call them. But these gangs now we're going with colors. Before it was all ethnic. Now we're going by color lines. Brown people, Oriental people, black people. In our past, it's always been ethnic type, Irish, Polish, whatever.
Is it difficult for a young kid to resist becoming a member of one of these gangs?
Very difficult. I'm talking 9, 10, 11-year-olds. They're first recruited at that age because of their young age. They can move around, not be seen by police officers. Police officers usually don't pay attention to 11, 12-year-old kids. They figure they're good kids. They haven't got in any trouble yet. These are the kids that become the runners for the gangbangers.
Gangbangers?
We call them gangbangers. Gang members, gangbangers. For reasons, bangers, shooting, gangbangers. These young kids, they can recruit them to do their dirty work for them.
Would you be able to work more effectively against the gangs if the handgun laws were changed in the U.S.?
Well, I'm an American. I believe in guns, and actually, I'm a policeman. I spent a lot of time in the military where I handled weapons. But I'm not one for everybody carrying a gun or allowed to have guns. I don't believe in it. Unless a person is a decent person, it can be shown that he's a working person, he should be allowed to have a gun in his home by all means. But anybody that's going to be able to buy a gun any place he so chooses and carrying it around with him, I don't believe in this.
So what weapons do the gangbangers
He is carrying sophisticated handguns, machine guns, automatic weapons, and better handguns than we're carrying.
Machine guns? Kids with machine guns?
Machine guns. Uzis and this sort of thing. You know what an Uzi is. You've seen
Yes,
Jewish people over in Israel and these places carrying these small automatic weapons.
It's got a huge rate of fire.
A large rate of fire.
So what do you do when you're up against a kid with one of those things?
Get out of the way.
Even closer to the front line than Captain Woods, plainclothes detective Tom McMahon goes out on regular car patrol into Robert Taylor homes.
These drive-by shootings are becoming popular again in Chicago, where they just drive by and they'll fire into a crowd standing around a basketball court and hit somebody. Nobody in particular, they just want to shoot another gang member. And they're finding out that the 14 to 15-year-old, the juvenile, the kid who, when he goes to court, doesn't get sentenced to life imprisonment, you know, as a result of his involvement. He's probably a first-time offender. In some instances, it's a code. It's your initiation into the gang. A lot of these gangs require an initiation process in. It has to involve something criminal to become part of the gang. You either go into a store, you shoplift, or you go into a school and spray paint the name of the gang all over the school. There's something criminal. That's on the lower end. On the bigger end, to escalate yourself up the ladder in the gang, to achieve some status in the gang, you have to shoot someone. You have to be known as a shooter.
Can you spot the difference between civilians and gang members just by looking at them, the way they dress and everything?
Sure. There's a real significance to the whole scenario of the gangs. Right versus left. The right hand versus the left hand is basically how it goes. It is also folks versus people. Again, there's gang graffiti all along the walls here. The folks are all the Disciple Nation. The people are the El Rukins, the Cobra Stones, the Mickey Cobras, the Vice Lords. And that is basically, if you were to compare this to LA, that's their colors. Here it's folks versus people, there it's the Bloods versus the Crips. And we can break it down. We can break the entire gang structure down into two folds. Folks on one side, people on the other, and they clash. That's what all the violence is about. Control of territory, control of narcotics, control of the buildings, control of schools. All of it stems from the folks versus people.
To anyone who, like me, spent a lot of his own childhood hanging around street corners, all this hanging around street corners might look reasonably harmless. But in my day, we had cap pistols and bubble gum. There wasn't a crack pusher working the corridor or an arms dealer waiting up the alley to sell me a rocket launcher on hire purchase. Is he in the gang?
Oh, yeah.
What would you say the little one's chances are with the ball?
Well, look at him. Here he is standing down here. He's probably one of the big brothers here. He's probably a younger brother to somebody standing on this corner of this group. This is what he has to look up to. These are his role models. Get her with the forks up. She's doing the pitchfork sign. Did you see that?
Uh-huh. What does that mean?
That's forks. The pitchforks are the sign of the gangster disciples. She's throwing the pitchforks up. That's the gang sign. How they do that, they signify to each other, telling each other that they're folks. Hey, what's going on?
What y'all doing?
Hi, fellas.
What is this for?
You're on British television today.
Straight up? What we on
Straight
this
up.
for? What channel is this on?
What's the earring in the ear for?
Huh? Boy, I got this when
What's
I was
this
a
for?
baby.
We're
on TV, man.
Yeah.
What's this for?
British Broadcasting System.
What channel?
You know?
What channel?
It's going to be filmed over there. Won't see it here. You know, you won't be a star in your own neighborhood, pal.
That's $1 for
What y'all trying to make them see what it look like in the ghetto or something?
No, you know how those gangsters are with their hats to the left and the right and all of that, you know.
His hat's straight.
His hat's straight. Why is his hat straight?
Why are you filming us?
Why is his hat straight? He ain't no gangbanger. What happens if he puts his hat to the right? Nothing? Then he be folks, right?
Yeah.
And what happens if he puts the hat to the left?
He be a brother. He be a hook.
Okay. Folks and them duke it up, don't they? Folks and people, huh?
They help each other. They make money together. You ain't know?
How they make money?
They go work in Jewels and Amico and stuff like that.
Yeah? Yeah. Tell me another fable, pal.
Anyway, Jess, we have a man with a rifle in the rear of 2240.
But hanging around hopelessly isn't the whole story of the ghettos. Young people play at other things beside human target practice. Athletes and gymnasts come out of here, and though it's sad for the ghettos that they don't often go back, the urge to get on is no bad thing just because it's based on the urge to get out. Upward mobility helps to civilize the city, even if it leaves the place where it came from short of leaders. And a lot of the music born here stays here. Black blues made big money for white musicians, but some of the black musicians make at least a living, and the music they make is the authentic sound of Chicago. It's a city that sounds black.
If I can't find my woman, people I just won't be satisfied. I'm going to California. I'm going to stop in New York too. Then I'm going on into Atlanta, Georgia. Stop in Mississippi too. I've got to leave here, baby. Gonna catch a gold-tailed bird and ride. If I can't find my woman, people I just won't be satisfied. Let me hear you move. That's what I'm talking about.
Mike Royko was right. Jim Crow still lives in Chicago, but he doesn't rule, nor does Uncle Tom. From the same beach where a black boy was stoned to death in 1919, you see black children swimming in the same part of the same lake as the white children. You see the black middle class in the classiest places, and by now it would look wrong if they weren't there. No white strut, no black cringe. You see self-assurance. There are black people outside City Hall, confident and powerful enough to wonder why the black people inside City Hall can't get their act together. One of the most relentlessly dynamic big businessmen in the city is the founder of Ebony magazine and all-round empire builder, John Johnson.
Chicago is probably the best city for blacks in this nation. And it's the best city for blacks because we have the numbers. And we were segregated, and we were together, and we worked with each other, and we were encouraged by each other. The problem that any minority has, you have to have symbols of success. You have persons that you can emulate. You have to say that there's a person like me, and I can be like them. And I think that's what we have in Chicago. I know it's the thing. When I came here, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I went to work for an insurance company, and I saw black people making decisions and conducting commerce, and I was inspired, and I thought, gee, if these guys can do it, these guys are the same color as I am, I can do it. And it gave me the feeling to go forward. And I think that that's what we have here in Chicago. It's a vitality, it's dynamic, it's contagious. People want to succeed because they see persons like themselves succeeding.
You surprised by how far black people have come since you were young in the
Look,
US?
I often say in speeches, it's another world. It's a new world. From the time I came to Chicago, when you couldn't eat in restaurants, you couldn't drive buses, you couldn't work on the police force. It's just another world. It's almost unbelievable.
Yeah. Have you come as far as you should since 1954?
No. I don't think anyone ever thinks they've come as far as they should. For example, I'm still editing black magazines. I think I could edit any magazines for anyone. You know, years ago, when integration came, people kept saying to me, now that integration is here, and Life is a picture magazine, and Look is a picture magazine, when is Ebony going out of business? And I said, Ebony is not going out of business. Why can't Life and Look go out of business? Now, I never thought they would, but they did. And I said then, and I say now, if race is not a factor, and if we're going to measure people by ability and service, then I would be more successful than they are, because I've had more experience giving service to white people than they have given service to me. I understand them. I've been forced to understand them. But they don't understand me because they haven't had to.
It took more than just one city to make a man like that. It took all the brave people of a generation and a free nation for them to be brave in. But if Chicago inspired John Johnson, it ought to inspire us. Writers, some of them great writers, enjoy making Chicago sound like the end of the world, a gleaming core rimmed around with decay and corruption, like a boil set to burst. If you were stuck in some parts of Chicago, it would probably feel like that. But if you're visiting the rest of it, it feels more like the start of something. There's a lot more to Chicago than just the ghost of Al Capone, whom the city would prefer to forget, although he won't be forgotten by the lady who used to play his requests, Miss Eve.
Oh, but man, it's beautiful.
For someone who risked being cut in half by a hail of lead if she failed to remember a mobster's favorite song, Miss Eve looks strangely ageless until you remember that it all happened only yesterday.
You fall, and I'm thinking I wouldn't mind at all. Eat your heart out.
Submachine guns no longer chatter in the street outside. The heavy weapons are in the housing developments. Downtown, the violent past is part of the decor now. The voice of Chicago, Studs Terkel, put me straight about the city's unsavory reputation.
No, it's not deserved. You see, it is more theatrically corrupt. You see, Chicago is theater. Everything is exaggerated. Theater is larger than life. So is Chicago. It's larger. There may be bigger populations, but it's not larger in its extravagances than Chicago is. And so it's not, many cities are corrupt, but Chicago delights in its corruption. And it was the first, in a sense. That makes it the big daddy of the corrupt cities. See, Chicago may be corrupt, but the respectables of the town secretly like that idea. It gives a kick, a juice to their life. And so when someone visits another country, then they say, yup, Chicago, boom, boom, boom. The other person says, oh, no, it's not that way, but deep, deep down likes the idea very much.
So people are really thrilled by Capone and all that stuff, huh?
Of course, deep down, sure. What made Capone? Acceptance, really. What made Capone? The wink is what made Capone. After it was Prohibition that set him up. But after Prohibition, what houses of prostitution, brutishness, more or less fulfilling, as he would say, a public need. It's so funny about Capone. He's still remembered fondly by some. The same Al Capone had a bread line. People remember him for the bread line, forgetting of all the brutishness and all those, not he knocked off, but the complete debasement of the human spirit. And so there's a fondness, there's a perversity here too in Chicago. There's kind of a fondness for him, at least for the memory of him. They go, however, really.
Chicago is theater, but it's real theatre. In the old days, when New York and Los Angeles were joined by rail, silver trains brought the Hollywood stars to pose for the flashbulbs as they stepped between sleeping cars, caught for one bedazzled moment in the middle of the country whose dreams they embodied. Now the silver planes take them overhead, but Chicago is still there, exciting if you can take the tension, taller every time you look, and full of light during the night.
Last night, baby, in my car, scared I might see what I was looking for. Look by on losing you, I can see.
Tomorrow sees the start of Sky Travel's Ticket to Ride season with extreme rides at 10. But you can get in on the action right now by taking part in our competition. Sky Digital viewers just hit red to enter, or you can get more information on our website, skytravel.co.uk. Back to what's coming up today, though, and we join the Zoo Vet in half an hour after Sky Travel Shop next.
Hey!